So let's work this out, shall we? The American president, 81-year-old Joe Biden. You know the guy who often doesn't look like he knows what day of the week it is, walks in the wrong direction, falls over on stages, slips down steps coming out of aeroplanes, and generally all round is a bit of an embarrassment for America. At least I would have thought that. And that was very much confirmed by the special prosecutor the other day, saying that he was an elderly man with a poor memory. Well, you can knock me down with a feather, because he's had his annual health summary that has been released by the White House, and the docs have said he's a healthy, robust 81-year-old, and he can successfully execute the duties of the presidency, including being commander-in-chief. Worth noting, though, that was the physical examination. He refused to take a cognitive test. Well, I'm joined by Eric Prince, businessman, former US Navy SEAL officer, founder of Blackwater and conservative. Eric, forgive me. We love America, really, but when we look at this, we say to ourselves, how is any of this credible? What the hell's going on?
If they didn't have double standards, they'd have no standards. I wonder if the pilot of Air Force One could also refuse a cognitive test.
Yeah, well, quite. No, it is arguably the most important job in the world. But what's interesting, of course, is that voters overwhelmingly, including many Democrats, think the guy is simply too old.
Yeah, the emperor has no clothes. And it's becoming increasingly obvious, and it's embarrassing. And unfortunately, the enemies of Western civilization see the weakness, and they're making the most of it over the next 10, 12 months.
Yeah, I think the withdrawal of the last few troops in Afghanistan, they were purely there for training purposes. That was the moment, wasn't it, really, that the world started to go wrong?
They didn't listen to any of the warnings, and they really believe their own Beltway nonsense bubble, and the enemy always gets a vote, and they fed it to them.
Wow.
At the end of a bayonet.
I know that Donald Trump, and I met him at the weekend, I know that he would love Biden to be the candidate. Biden is the ideal Democrat to face in November. They're going to ditch him, aren't they, Eric?
It's not as easy as it sounds.
Go on.
Because they'd have to invoke the 25th Amendment.
To say that he's mentally...
To say that he's actually mentally incapacitated, which effectively this prosecutor has said, I'm not going to prosecute him because if his defense would be, he's a senile old man. That's what the federal prosecutor just said. But to remove him from the candidacy, they have to invoke the 25th Amendment, which I can't see the Democrats doing. And so they'd have to convince him somehow at the convention to let them swap. Now, the Democrats changed their rules so they can do a last-minute switch at their convention, which is in August. But absent that, he will be the candidate for president.
Quite extraordinary. Now, Donald Trump gave a big speech about NATO the other week and said, look, guys, if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you. How do you assess the mood of America towards its NATO involvement? Is it much weaker than it was?
It's absolute fatigue. I think you still have well over half of NATO countries not spending anywhere near the 2%. That's been generally agreed to for the last 70 years, and they're just not doing it. And so I think Americans, as we're $34 trillion in debt, they're sick of the free rider, freeloading aspect to it. Norway spends 1.5%, and they have a website showing their national sovereign wealth fund, which is north of $1 trillion now. And so there's a disconnect. Why do American taxpayers have to pay when Norway is not willing to? Or Germany, even worse.
They've been paying about 1% for many, many years, and Ireland almost nothing.
The overall readiness of all their militaries is really pathetic. And so is NATO an alliance, or is it a protectorate? The era of protectorate is ending.
Yeah. It is very, very interesting. We protect Ireland on this stuff, and in the same way we hope America is going to protect us. Do you think, and Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, actually supports what Trump is trying to do? He wants those member states to start spending money, and there is what's going on the doorstep in Ukraine. Do you think if the other European countries do start paying the membership fee, that Americans, and in particular the next American president, which could well be Donald Trump, will take a different view?
Yes, certainly. Even, when Trump started complaining, it was 5 of 28 countries.
Yep.
And now it's, I think, 11 of 28.
11 or 12,
yeah. And so there's at least some progress. I don't think there would have been progress unless Trump was slapping in the face about it. So there is look, the United States loves Europe. Americans love to vacation in Europe. There's a cultural kinship. So it's not like America's looking to run away from Europe and leave it to its own, leave it to the wolves. No, but fair is fair.
No, okay. Well, that point, I have to say I agree with that point 100%. Now, overnight, we learned that Illinois do not want Donald Trump to be on the ballot. Yet another legal case that needs to be appealed. Can he survive this sheer massive indictments piled up ahead of him?
He's in much better shape now than he even was 3 or 4 months ago. When you look at the nonsense of the Georgia prosecutor, Fani Willis, paying her lover $600,000 while he's coordinating with the White House and taking cash. I mean, the whole thing is really bad. The January 6th nonsense from the federal prosecutor, I believe, has been stayed or will be stayed by the Supreme Court until after the.
Well, January 6th. I mean, let's face it. January the 6th was pretty ugly.
It was a protest that got out of hand. It's not an insurrection, right? The relationship between the United States and Britain, 1775. That was an insurrection, and people showed up with guns that day.
They did, and they won.
And if they want to call January 6th an insurrection, not one firearms arrest in a country with 300 million personally owned firearms. So not fair to call it insurrection.
So Georgia was the most worrying of these cases, wasn't it?
And literally the prosecutor pretty much just dove on her pen set.
Does Trump win?
Will Trump win?
Yeah, will he win?
I think so. Yes.
Eric Prince, thanks for coming back on the programme.
Glad to be here.
Now, what the Farage moment. Lee Anderson, you made this speech about Sadiq Khan. Well, would you believe that the Metropolitan Police are now assessing whether a hate crime has been committed? Now, the problem with this is the all-party parliamentary group's definition of Islamophobia. And it is. Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. So if that was to be taken by the next Labour government and put into law, you almost finish up with a blasphemy law in this country. No, really, you get very close to a blasphemy law. We can slag off the Church of England, which I regularly do on this show because I can't stand the Archbishop. We can take the mickey out of the Pope. But if we were to say that we don't like Islam at all because of the way that it treats gay people, the way that it treats all over the world, where it runs states, the way that it treats women, we might find ourselves actually getting close to committing something akin to hate speech. And I think all of this, going back to the Equalities Act of 2010 and before, I think hate speech being in law is a mistake. The whole thing is subjective. And most of it's based on, if I take offence at what you say and say it was hate speech, well, then the authorities may well follow it up. This is all about individual group rights. It's all about identity politics. It's all, folks, a complete and utter disaster. The way forward, whether we're talking about prejudice against Jews, against Muslims, against people of colour, whatever it is, the way forward with all of this is to treat absolutely everybody exactly the same before the law. No fear, no favour for any groups. Treat everybody equally. And interestingly, that great human rights leader, Martin Luther King, said that was exactly what he wanted. And yet, we're managing now through all of this to divide ourselves up. It is a mistake.